This is a small sketch of the original Hay Wain by Constable, which is in chiaroscuro, which is brown and white on the red bowl canvas, and a 5 and 20-minute sketch. I'm not saying this to explain that I've done it very quickly, but this is about the speed Constable would have made the eventual sketch for his Hay Wain. He made about 4. But prior to the sketches for the Hay Wain in chiaroscuro, he would have made extensive sketches in pencil, mainly, and oil-colour sketches on paper. Also enlisting the aid of his assistant, Johnny Dunthorne, who lived in East Bergholt whilst Constable was living in Hampstead, and there's a letter extant in which Constable asked Johnny to paint or draw a wain. So he went down to the mill. This was probably actually happened, that the horses were not being watered as much as the wheels were being soaked with water because of the hot summer's day. And in those days, of course, it was deeper because it was a mill pond, and the sluice gates came from just here, down there, and on this side, extant again today. This is Willie Lott's cottage. Here is Constable's home then. Behind us is the mill, and across here, in the original Hay Wain, is a hay wain. This is a scarf. It's called a scarf. It's a general purpose wagon. The actual name of the painting was called Landscape Noon. It was given the name Hay Wain because the scarf was used with little piece of wood around it in order to take the hay. So it's got a false name, which doesn't mean to say it's a false painting, except that it wasn't done on the spot. In point of fact, a 6 feet by 5 canvas would have blown in the water in the first 10 minutes, I should imagine, with East Anglia. But here, in the original, Constable was made from the outside closet, Willie Lott's house. They didn't have much in the way of plumbing in those days. He's turned it into a brick wall with a pretty little elder tree to hide the true nature of the building. But the rest of the building, which is today used as a student's hostel, still remains. The trees, more or less the same, except everything's higher. And you can no longer see this exact spot. There's a little chap here fishing or sorting out the reeds, something like that. Originally, there was a horse here, which now in the original, which is in the National Gallery, has become impedimenta, has turned from the horse that was there into a barrel that Constable altered his mind and painted a barrel over the horse. This picture would have been, of course, enlarged, and there's the accumulation of all the drawings, the cloud studies he'd make extensively. Being a miller's son, he was aware of the nature of clouds, very important to their work, and he would have made several, if not 100, small little daub sketches to make up the general total picture. But in Hampstead, in the studio, I must emphasise that not on the spot, because the first roughs, which are infinitely better than the finished product, unfortunately for all these academicians, had to be highly polished. But Constable worked extremely fast, out in nature, and very laboriously and slowly, and probably hating it inside. He was a man of the outdoors. The Hay Wain, really, and it's almost a comic cuts kind of picture now because it's been reproduced like the Mona Lisa. But nevertheless, it's still a very beautiful painting. He couldn't get the money he asked for it. It was purchased by a man named Arrowsmith, who was, strange enough, was a French dealer with another painting for, I think, £250 of guineas. And, but the beauty of it was, and when Constable wrote to Fisher, his friend, in relation to this, and Leslie is also an RA, about it, they said, well, at least you will get fame, because the French love painting more than the English, which of course is quite true to this day. And so when it was shown in the Salon, he received a gold medal and an enormous amount of acclaim. 7 years ago, I decided to paint the Hay Wain in reverse to celebrate his bicentenary in 1976, because it's wonderful to apparently walk into a picture, turn around and see the artist painting it. I actually sketched the Hay Wain in reverse with a landscape behind it, extensive views of trees and meadows and God knows what. And then I transferred this to the canvas in the usual way of squaring up, and was happily about 4 months through it, and an old ploughman came in for a cup of tea in the adjacent cafe. And my friend told him I was painting Constable's Hayway, and I was worried about the traces on the horses, which I didn't know a lot about. He said, oh, I'll have a look at them for him. And he came in and shook his head and said, you ever been down to Flatford, Master? I said, no. He said, well, I suggest you go down there, because he said, there ain't no trees behind the mill pond at Willie Lott's cottage, there's buildings. I said, oh, no. And I walked down there, and to my horror, saw this beautiful building. So I made the sketch, and then a little rough sketch in colour, and thought I might just as well plod on with the big original painting. This is the preparatory drawing done on the red bowl in line, in white chalk, although I've used other white just to help the television. This looks over-elaborate, but you see all the perspective lines here are necessary because there are courses of brickwork going in recessive perspective across there. Also, the wane itself has a vanishing point. In order to achieve this, I tack a nail physically into the stretcher, which keeps the thing going for you like this for a hell of a time. It looks much more complicated than it is, actually. This is about a half an hour's work because I've traced it. And once you've got your original design, you can retrace as you go. It doesn't take long. The next move is to paint in chiaroscuro again, the same as the wane itself. I should be more retarded because this is, of course, a more complicated, it's not a better painting by any means, it's just a more complicated one. We achieve this by drawing in the shadows first, remembering that the sun, we imagine, is about 11 o'clock up there, and without any trouble about what it is going over, we allow, this is oil paint, not tempera, and these shadows will tell a story very quickly, and it shows the red underneath. And once you start working on a large scale like this, with the bright light colour under and a wash, this is impervious to what I'm putting on, so it can all be washed off again as you need it. And then you quickly realise shadows in the picture. On the palette there's dark, light and medium, with those three tones quietly and carefully placed in the right places with a bit of luck. The picture starts to take on, you use fresh brushes for the new tones, takes on a different aspect because now one can, although this appears quite light, one can start drawing the salient points in the painting with a certain knowledge that what is underneath will stay, with a certain knowledge that the perspective which lines have helped you, are helping you to achieve truth, veracity. And if this is applied very quietly, patiently, one can achieve, before photography, remember, a photographic negative which, when coloured, gives the same effect to a painting. This is a form of grisaille painting, as the coloured transparencies, if it's bright enough, give to a coloured photograph. I'm now going to use the white, which gives, wherever you place it, the fact that, remember, we've got a kind of 11 o'clock sunshine or something, light coming down, and it will hit all the parts of the animals and the traceries and separate the two by this pole bar. In this, it's good to use impasto, thick little touches here and there for the tracery, and really enjoy painting them. Little chains coming down. We separated this horse from this horse, so we now separate this horse from the wall, remembering all the beauty of the harness, which one can draw in very accurately later with time, and how the light is picked up in a very beautiful way on the harness. Just as in the painting of water for shipping or whatever, one has to be aware of the underbelly of the ship, or the underbelly of the horse, or what is more politely termed reflected highlights. And they tell an enormous story if they're accurately applied. And at this stage, when all the forms are drawn in, and of course, remember, one can merge this with the finger or brush if you wanted to make more subtle movements anywhere. And but the good thing is to get dark and light first, and then the intermediate. It depends how you feel about it. But at some stage, it's a good idea to apply the palette knife, as we did in the Temeraire, as one does often. And this is a little difficult, but just imagine water is spurting up under the horse's feet, and the source of light coming from up here again will tell the story itself. You splash it up just the same as you're in a bath throwing the water at your wife or something. And when it feels that you've got enough, you come back, look what you've done, and then you remember that this has to obey perspective, and this, and so forth. There are a couple of little ducks here, and we must remember those, and just indicate that quickly. Because they themselves will have a different type of water, or rather movement of water, and so forth, and you carry the painting through to its final conclusion in grisaille before you go on to colour. This painting is now in the state of grisaille, in which it now requires dead colouring. Dead colouring means that one places the colour over the painting in areas to give one an idea how it will look ultimately, if one trusts. And to cheer you up, as there's a piece of red here, we'll start with that. I'm using a relatively limited palette. Constable would have sketched this in very, very quickly in the open somewhere first, on oil paper, not canvas. This red now becomes the dominant note and will come into the water, reflect in the water. Whilst you've got the red on the brush, it's a good idea to carry through that the pole has red on it. This will also reflect in the water. The old boy's got a red waistcoat, the coachman chap. This will be reflected roughly. Underneath the carriage is a red shape between the horse's leg, which is a form of, old-fashioned form of spring. Under the main pole, this is where you study what you're painting so that you know what's going on, is a bar. We can't see it in there, would be the axis pin. There's a bit of decoration on the end here. All this helps in painting the picture to carry the colour through. One doesn't necessarily have to start with red. One doesn't have to paint every brick, it's not necessary, but just suggest them here and there, different colours. You could do this all over the picture, actually, but I won't do much more than indicate a few. It's always a good idea to work over a picture generally. And we remember the original is called Landscape Noon, which this tells you that actually it's about 11 o'clock and not noon, because this acts like a sundial. But that's only artistic license. We pick up Naples yellow, much used by the old masters. This chap has got a buff-coloured jerkin on, with the corduroy, or rather moleskin probably, trousers of the period, hard-wearing, cheap. His hat, as a dominant note, I noticed Constable in the Wayne used a quite beautiful yellow, very carefully chosen, for his hat. It's probably a straw hat, as it's a summer's day. We always leave, or one should always leave, flesh colours to the last, and try to keep intermediate colours flowing through the picture. There's brass work on the horse. Indicate that with a coarse yellow. We now make a series of greys with white, blue, black, and one can introduce other colours into them. The wheels of the old wagons were usually painted of varying degrees according to the county, Oxfordshire, wherever. Around here in Suffolk, in Essex and Norfolk, in East Anglia, they were often, I believe, blue, quite a bright blue, but Constable, being a man of discernment, didn't want to paint a gypsy caravan. Not that they're not beautiful, but it would be out of keeping, so the application of grey throughout the picture. If you look at the original Wayne, there's an enormous amount of greys in it. It's one of his favourite colours because in the skies above East Anglia, he's always conscious as a miller's son of the movement of the clouds in the sky affecting. We have a top light when you're painting out in nature. And if we introduce some darks towards the end of the painting, it's usually better to work from light to dark in most cases. These are black horses, Shire horses. Doesn't mean to say you have to paint it 4 inches thick with ivory black, but a glaze, a gentle glaze over the bold underpainting, allowing the red to show through, will give the form of the horse, the colour of the horse. Now I'm being a very naughty boy. I'm standing too close to the picture all the time because I'm talking. So I go back to look, shudder, and return. Because immediately you can see 10,000 things that are wrong, which is lovely to know because we can't all be perfect. But in the drawing of animals, again, you have to be a Stubbs, really, to paint a horse properly, I think. Go over. One shouldn't be afraid to go over yesterday's work, or it can always be drawn out again with the thumb, little pieces here and there to create the form as we did initially. You mustn't get the paint too thick in glazes ever, in shadows. It must be thin for academic painting. I'll put a little piece of impasto on here, which could be done with a palette knife. And come over to the lady's dress. And I'd forgotten I'd put a little red on there, and it's wet, but it doesn't matter. That's a happy accident. It's a Joshua Reynolds stated, before my time, that only a fall destroys a happy accident. And the reason for this is that the red on there echoes around the area from which it is, onto the top of the dog, onto the dress of the lady, even onto the wall, and down here. And the whole area becomes, from this one little accident, a little object of joy, because we can emphasize the little pink bits and that. This creates colour harmony and unity. I'm putting on in impasto light greens rapidly around this building, which will later be glazed, as, contrary to general opinion, Constable glazed a lot, as indeed the Dutch masters, and they used this in different ways. They would paint blue and glazed yellow upon it, or yellow and glazed blue upon it, to make different greens. He was, of course, trained in the Royal Academy and also copied the old Dutch masters, and this would have influenced his technique. And the glazing underneath, which will be warm to contrast with the cool of the green. So imagine that the light's coming this way, and under here you can just rub in as though the foliage is cast in the shadow, which of course adds depth and mystery and magic again, as glazes and scumbles always do, allowing for the fact this isn't dry properly, but when dry the glaze would take and send the bush out. At the end of paintings, it's necessary, of course, to do detail, and we use the maul stick, which means painting stick, used by all the old masters. Much maligned today, but of course, as I showed the other time, with it's good as a ruler. It's used basically as a hand rest, because even young men's hands shake. Both Rembrandt and Leonardo complained that in their old age they were shaky and had to use maul sticks. They describe what I'm doing now as penciling. They called these pencils, which is very disconcerting for anyone reading manuscripts. And so we go through the picture like this. The painting has been carried about as far as it's possible for demonstration purposes, because it would take quite a considerable time to finish it off. Remember that Constable took about 3 months to paint the Haywain with all the odds and ends going on. So I'm going to turn to this painting, which took me longer than it took Constable to paint the Haywain, because there is, of course, much more detail, too much possibly, in it. You see that by the general aspect that some thought has gone into the design generally of the painting, the movement, the colour, the drawing, and so on. And when I give it a coat of varnish later, it will again bring out the tones to their true values. This is about, I think, 5 years since I painted this. And that's about all I can do. So good night. Thank you.